I'd been putting it off, but it was finally time to clean out my garage. So on February 10th, 2012, I rolled my wheelchair out into the garage and began cleaning up the pile that had been accumulating over the many years of my life. As I kept moving junk, I noticed the Beetle Light footlocker that I hadn't seen for years. It was still collecting dust and spiderwebs over in the corner under the window. It was an old, dirty military storage box that all of us kids were issued to keep our stuff in. It had been so many years that I had almost forgotten I still had it. Back in the 1980s, I journaled everything that happened to me during this time, and stored the journals in this footlocker. It was my job to draw illustrations and write descriptions of my experiences, as well as what my teammates told me their experiences were, and put them down in these journals. I rolled my wheelchair over to the footlocker, unlocked it, and opened the top of it. A puff of dust flew up in the air as the lid of the chest fell back. I could clearly see the neatly stacked journals were still as I had left them over 30 years ago. When I looked inside, I had forgotten how many of these I had done. Back when I had written these journals, it was a very scary time for our country. There was a Cold War going on between the United States and the Soviet Union, which is now Russia. These journals were top secret and could not be shown to anyone outside the government at the time. But now that Russia was no longer an enemy, they had been declassified and I was free to share them with anyone. It's strange for me to think that so much of my life was wrapped up in this little green beetle, which was the firefly symbol representing Beetle Light. So these are the journals of my life and the lives of my friends during that time. This all started when I was a 12-year-old boy in a small eastern coastal town in the United States, with an old Indian name called Lightning Bow. Here are the Beetle Light Journals, beginning with the first one that got the whole thing started. Beetle Light Journal number 1, Keeper of the Light. Chapter 1. This is My Life. My name is Chris Richards, and I live on the east coast of the United States in a little coastal town named Lightning Bow. This is an old Indian name given to us over 300 years ago. Many people think it came from the special kind of species of firefly that we have here. Our town attracts tourists from around the world every June to see these little beetles put on their big light show. I'm a writer and an artist, so I thought I'd try my luck at writing a journal. This is my first, so we'll see how it goes. This is what I looked like when I was 12, at home doing artwork. One of my other favorite things to do at home was invent things. I'll get into that in a minute. As you can see, I'm in a wheelchair. I don't have the use of my legs, and I can't feel anything from the waist down. It's always been that way, but I don't let it stop me from doing what I like to do. Something amazing happened to me on Tuesday, the 29th of May, 1984. This experience was so out of the ordinary that it's the reason I started journaling in the first place. So here's what happened. If I wasn't painting, sketching, or inventing something, you would have found me hanging out at the Briarwood Rehabilitation and Training Center, where I spent most of my free time working out with some of the best wheelchair racers in the country. My goal was to someday make the racing team. We had the best athletes from every sport in the country training here for what is now called the Paralympics and also the Special Olympics. Briarwood was one of the top sports training centers in the country back in 1984, and I was lucky it was located right here in my little town of Lightning Bow. So I took full advantage of hanging out with these athletes as much as I could. As I said earlier, Lightning Bow is what the Indians had named this valley leading to the ocean. Everybody thinks that the Indians saw the flashing fireflies in the shape of a bow or something, and named this forest area Lightning Bow. I guess the name stuck because here we are 300 years later and we're still calling our town Lightning Bow. Our particular species of firefly does something very special. Every year tourists come from all over the world to our town to see them for 2 weeks in June when they put on their show. This species of firefly is famous for synchronized flashing or flashing at the same time. This is a big deal, and our town makes a lot of money from these tourists, so the fireflies are protected here and they're important to our economy. We have so many of these lightning bugs and tourists that our town has a firefly festival every summer. All of the kids in town collect fireflies in jars, and on the night of the festival everyone opens their jars to let the fireflies take off up into the air together. They make the biggest light show you've ever seen. It's really cool. I don't know, but I guess that's where they got the name Beetle Light. This brings me to the secret world of Beetle Light. In the back of the Briarwood Training Center and over the hill from our town, there used to be an old rock quarry pit, bigger than the size of a large football stadium. It was now a secret area behind a security fence with an electronically locked gate. This gate had the Beetle Light Firefly symbol on it. If you were wondering who they were, no one knew for sure. But I would soon find out what Beetle Light was. This is the beginning of how I found out what goes on behind that mysterious security gate with the little green beetle on it. The security gate was off limits to everyone but a few select people. Some of these people I had seen training at Briarwood. No one knew who they were or what went on behind the Beetle Light gate. It looked like some kind of government operations area, but no one without a special Beetle Light electronic card could get past the guard to find out what went on inside. Some people in town had flown over the secret area, reported seeing a giant glass dome of some sort. It was constructed over the huge quarry pit. That was the only information anyone knew about this strange place. Many years ago they cut giant stones of granite here for different construction projects around the country. The quarry pit went out of business sometime in the 1940s, I think, and the forest had taken over much of it these days. There was a rumor, however, that the Department of the Interior was using it for some kind of endangered animal project, having to do with preserving our particular species of firefly, but no one really knew for sure. Maybe that's why they called it Beetle Light. I had seen black helicopters land behind the fence in the past, along with government-looking cars driving through the front gate. I was dying to see what was going on in there. I'll talk about all of this some more later. So, back to my world. As a kid, I was an inventor, an artist, and I wanted to be a wheelchair racer. I hoped to race one of my inventions. I called it a wheel racer. My goal was to make the team and enter my invention in the 1988 Paralympics. More than that, I wanted to be able to keep up with my friends that raced their bikes down Monument Hill, one of the steepest hills in our town. I was tired of being left behind when the guys would take off riding after school. That's why I invented my wheel racer in the first place. Well, that, and I wanted to impress a certain girl I liked. She worked out at the Briarwood Training Center. More about her later. At the time, I was still working out the bugs in my wheel racer, but it was fast, real fast. I would take it down some pretty steep hills, but it was a little tippy at high speed. It moved right along, though, with some special wheel hubs I invented to make it race faster going downhill than a regular bike. It was made from parts of bicycles, go-karts, and other things in my dad's garage. I sort of copied some of Bob Hall's design. He was so cool. He was the first person to enter the Boston Marathon in a racing wheelchair that he invented in 1975. He raced the 26 miles in 2 hours and 58 minutes with just arm power. My chair wasn't as good as his at the time, but I kept working on the design. There was a steep road that wound down through the cemetery above the lighthouse in our town. It started at the top of the hill and came down through the graveyard and ended at the old lighthouse. This was the best place to test my wheel racer, because there weren't many people or cars to get in the way. More important than that was my friends wouldn't see me wipe out if I got out of control. I had been at the cemetery so many times testing, I must have known every name on every gravestone there. I kept testing and designing and redesigning the wheel racer until I got it right. I thought I had a winner with the latest version I was testing that day. At the time I thought, if I can keep it from tipping over, which was the problem I was having at high speed, I would have no problem keeping up with my friends going down Monument Hill. My best friend was Chase Stoddard. He had a twin brother named Jeff who was in rehabilitation over at the Briarwood Training Center, but I never really hung out with him. He was kind of a brain, and we didn't have much in common other than both of us were in wheelchairs. I did like to hang out with Chase, though, who had the fastest bike in my school. I thought that if I could keep up with Chase down Monument Hill, all my other friends would want to race with me too. So I kept working on my design, and Chase was happy to help me with my testing, because he beat me every time. Chapter 2. It all started on Tuesday. As I said, I spent a lot of my free time at the Briarwood Training Center, where a lot of us with disabilities went to train for the Paralympics or the Special Olympics. Rosa, the cute girl in my science class, also trained at Briarwood on the archery range. She was the girl I wanted to impress by racing down Monument Hill with the guys. I used to watch Rosa practicing on the shooting range at Briarwood. She was amazing. She was training as an archer for the Paralympics in 1988. She hit everything she aimed at. I thought she would easily make the archery team. I hoped I could make the racing team someday too. I thought maybe we could train together. I liked her a lot, but she didn't even know I was alive. I thought if I could get the bugs worked out of my wheel racer, and Rosa heard how fast and cool I was racing down Monument Hill with the guys, then maybe she'd want to train with me at Briarwood. On Wednesday morning, May 24th, 1984, I was in science class, and it was so boring. My teacher, Mr. Toomey, was talking about the solar eclipse we were going to have later that day. During a solar eclipse, the moon passes in front of the sun, blocking out some or all of the light, making everything during the day look very eerie and strange. All I wanted to do was get out with my wheel racer and start testing on Cemetery Hill. In class, we had to make these stupid pocket-sized cardboard cutouts and stick a hole through them. This would show the moon blocking out and moving in front of the sun. The sun shines through the hole in the cardboard and reflects on your hand or whatever, so you don't look directly at the sun and hurt your eyes. Looking at the sun directly can make you go blind, so I guess it was a good idea if you cared about seeing the eclipse. Mr. Toomey said the eclipse might do some strange things to nature on that day, like affecting the tides at the beach or making animals act a little weird during the event. I thought, whatever. Man, was I in for a surprise. After school on that day, my friends rode past me on their way to ride down Monument Hill. I wanted to go too, but my wheel racer wasn't ready yet, but hopefully it would be soon. I always hated being left behind, but today I was happy to get rid of anyone who might see me test my invention, just in case I wiped out. My best friend Chase was cool though. He asked me if I wanted to hang out, but I knew he really wanted to race with the guys, so I told him I was okay and it was all right to go. The hill the guys were headed for was really steep, but Cemetery Hill where I was going was just as good for me. I had to test out my latest design where no one would see me before I could take on Monument Hill in front of everybody. If I crashed in front of everyone, I knew Nick Cavallo would tell Rosa, and she would think I was a loser. So Cemetery Hill was perfect for now. It was testing time, and I made final adjustments to the wheel racer. I transferred over to it and threw some stuff in my blue backpack, like a flashlight and a couple of snacks. I looped the backpack over the back of my racer and I was off to the cemetery. I was so excited to try out this latest design I could hardly stand it. As I sailed down the sidewalk to the cemetery, I did notice it getting a little darker. The sky had a sort of orange-gray tint to it. Then I remembered the eclipse was going to happen today. There was also a few more dogs barking in the neighborhood than usual. It all just made the day a little more fun and out of the ordinary for me. I was having a blast. I remembered I'd still had that piece of cardboard with the hole in it from class. I pulled it out of my pocket and held it up in front of me. The light shined through the tiny hole and hit my hand. I could see the moon starting to move across the front of the sun and blocking out some of the light, making what looked like a crescent moon on my hand. It was kind of cool. I guess science class wasn't that boring after all. I put it back in my pocket and raced on to the cemetery. I finally got to the top of Cemetery Hill, and I could see all the way down the road winding through the gravestones to the lighthouse below. These were the perfect testing hills, but I remembered around this one curve there were some bumps in the road that you had to watch out for. Roots from a huge oak tree had lifted up the road. After these bumps, it was smooth sailing all the way to the lighthouse. As I pushed off and headed down the hill, I started picking up speed, a lot of speed. This new design was way faster than the last time I was testing here. I really had to hold on and keep this thing from going over. My front wheel was wobbling a little, and I was still tipping as I went around my first major curve in the road. The wheel racer was holding together pretty well, but was way faster than my normal wheelchair, and I wasn't quite used to going this fast. I remember thinking I had to find a way to make it more stable at high speed. I came around another corner, and there were the bumps in the road I was expecting, so I put a little pressure on the left wheel and swerved around, missing the bumps easily. When I looked up, I saw a rabbit directly in front of me, just sitting in the middle of the road like it owned the place. I was about to run it over, so I grabbed one wheel and turned quickly off the road to avoid hitting it. Chapter 3. The Crash at Marion's Stone. As soon as I swerved off the road to miss the rabbit, I was out of control, going about 20 miles an hour over rough grass. I was weaving through the gravestones, barely missing them as I swerved first left, then right. Gravestones were everywhere, and finally I just couldn't turn fast enough to miss the one directly in front of me. I crashed into it, hitting my head on the stone and overturning my wheel racer. Everything went black and I couldn't feel anything. I started to wake up, and things were still kind of blurry. To my surprise, my head didn't hurt at all, and I felt pretty much normal, just a little groggy. I remember looking down on my shoulder as I felt a hand on it, and heard someone with an older voice say, "Are you hurt, son?" I looked up and saw an old man carrying a shovel in one hand and a lantern in the other. He was using the shovel as a cane to walk and was kind of stooped over. I thought I was going to get into trouble for crashing into the gravestone, but he didn't seem to care at all. He said his name was Bertram Colby, and that he was the caretaker of the cemetery. He picked up my wheel racer and set it upright. Thankfully, it was still in one piece. I pulled myself back up into the chair, and he asked me what my name was and what I was doing out on a night like this one. It wasn't night. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was starting to get more and more gray outside with the eclipse event that was happening, and the lantern he was carrying was getting brighter as it grew darker outside. I told him my name was Chris, and I was testing my new invention, the wheel racer. I remember he said something strange. He said, "Ah, that's what he wants with you. You're an inventor, too." Bertram was pointing at the gravestone that I had just crashed into. I looked at the stone, and it said, "Marion McCready, the keeper of the light. He never let it fail." I looked at Bertram Colby and pointed at the writing on the stone and asked, what did "he never let it fail" mean? Bertram told me that this gravestone belonged to Marion McCready and that he was the lighthouse keeper down at the bottom of the hill. Bertram went on to say it means that Marion never let the light go out in the lighthouse, and there had never been a shipwreck on the rocks in the harbor at night. Ship captains could always see Marion's light in the lighthouse tower as they rounded the point coming into the bay. He said Marion McCready was an inventor, like I was, and he had invented a chair like the one I was sitting in right now. I thought, that's kind of weird. Bertram got serious for a moment and looked up into the darkening sky and said, "Marion died on a night like this one. It was May 28th, 1900. At the time I wondered what he'd meant. Later I checked, and there was an eclipse on May 28th, 1900. I think it was just a coincidence. Maybe. I was interested in what he was saying about this lighthouse keeper, and that he had been in a wheelchair and invented things like I did back so long ago. So I followed him deeper into the cemetery. I had to dodge gravestones as he walked and talked. As we went farther into the older part of the cemetery, he pointed out the gravestones around us and said, "I know all these people." I looked around and realized we were in an area of the cemetery where people had died back in the 1800s. I thought he must be some kind of historian to have known who all these people were. It was like the whole town from that time period were all around us. He was a very interesting guy, and I liked him. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram how the lighthouse keeper ended up in a wheelchair. He told me that on November 30th, 1834, on a day like this one, Marion was up on the light tower cleaning the lantern glass. It was in the middle of the day, and it started getting dark. He looked up at the sun that was blocked out by the moon, lost his balance, and fell from the tower. I asked Bertram if that's what killed Marion. He said the fall didn't kill him, but he landed on some scaffolding which broke his fall, but unfortunately also broke his back, and he lost the use of his legs. I asked how a lighthouse keeper could get up and down inside that old lighthouse using a wheelchair in the 1800s. He said he invented this contraption that carried him up and down the different levels. This was back before they turned the lighthouse into a museum for tourists. After the accident, Marion wanted to keep his job as lighthouse keeper, so he invented some kind of system to make it possible. I thought, how cool was that? Marion was just like me. If you have challenges from a world not designed for you, you have to adapt and come up with things that make it work. I like this lighthouse keeper. Chapter 4. Standing on Isabel's Grave. We stopped walking, and I had rolled over a certain grave that Bertram was careful to walk around. It made Bertram very nervous by having my wheel racer sitting on top of this particular grave. His eyes opened wide, and he started shaking and rattling the lantern he was holding. As he looked at me, I could see he had terror in his eyes. "What did I do? What did I do?" I yelled. I couldn't figure out what was going on. He told me I was sitting on old Isabel Drood, a mean witch of a woman that lived in our town many years ago. I remember what Bertram said to me like it was yesterday. "You best move off of her now, boy, and quickly with ya." The way he said it sounded a little bit weird to me, but I have to admit I was getting a little freaked out, and I wasn't going to argue with him. I backed away from him because he was getting a little scary all of a sudden. When I backed up, I bumped into Isabel's gravestone. Now I want to say right here and now, her stone was already cracked when I hit it with my back wheels. The top of the stone broke off and fell to the ground. Bertram really looked scared now. He looked at me and pointed down the hill and said, "You best get yourself to the lighthouse. She'll be coming for you now, boy." I looked down at the ground when I backed away from the broken stone, because I felt a little rumble under my chair. When I looked back up, Bertram Colby was gone. I was about as alone as I could be, and right in the middle of the oldest and scariest section of the graveyard. All of a sudden, this wasn't fun anymore, and I wanted out of here, and fast. I pulled hard backward with one wheel and pushed harder forward with the other, and spun my wheel racer around. I then took off as fast as I could toward the main road to get off this rough grass that was slowing me down so much. The rumbling was still coming from under Isabel's grave, and I could still hear it as I moved away from it, quickly toward the road. I wasn't watching where I was going because I was still looking for Bertram. When I looked forward again, I crashed into another stone. I got the chills. As I read the name on the stone in front of me, it said, "Bertram Colby, caretaker of the county cemetery. Rest in peace, our good friend." Oh, wow. Who had I been talking to all this time? I kept thinking, "Wake up, you're in a dream." But this didn't feel like any dream, and something really bad was coming my way. I didn't know what to think, but I had to get off this rough grass and back to the smooth road where my wheel racer could take off down the hill fast. As I pushed my chair as hard as I could toward the road, I kept looking back at Isabel's broken gravestone. There was still rumbling coming from the ground there. So many things were happening at the same time. I saw something start to form over Isabel's grave. It was a black cloud of mist or something, but was starting to take human shape. I was really scared, and I pushed harder for the road, which was about 50 feet away. When I looked back again, whatever it was that was hovering over Isabel's grave formed into an old woman wearing a black dress with long black sleeves. She had pure white hair, and a gray wrinkled face with sunken-in eyes that were really angry. Worst of all, she was looking and pointing directly at me. She raised her arm and pointed a bony finger that looked like a claw at me. I heard her yell, "You, boy, you did this," as she started walking in my direction, fast. She was walking around the gravestones that were in her way, which gave me a little time to get to the smooth road, so I could move faster and try to get away from her. I remember I was thinking, I was dead if she caught me and sank those claws into my head. I was pushing my racer over the rough grass and almost to the smooth road when my front wheel finally came loose. Thankfully it was still connected, but I wasn't going anywhere until I tightened it up. Even though it was a really bad time, I had to stop and reach down to tighten the front wheel again, or I would never get away from her. I secured the front wheel so it wouldn't wobble as much. I just kept thinking this must be the Isabel that Bertram had warned me about, and I had to get to the road. I worked as fast as I could to fix the wheel, but she was coming quickly toward me. I got the front wheel tightened again and looked around to see how close Isabel was. She was right on top of me. Looking up at her angry face was one of the most terrifying things I can remember in my life. She wanted me in pieces and was going to try her best to do just that. She took a swipe at my head as I ducked down. Her claws went right over my head with a whooshing sound. I could clearly see she just had long fingernails, but they sure looked like claws from far away. Either way, I didn't want to get cut with them. After her attack, she was thrown off balance and fell back. I took advantage and pushed off out in front of her. I made it onto the road where I finally started picking up speed down the road toward the lighthouse. I looked behind me and she was back about 20 feet, but still coming at me. I could see the lighthouse ahead, way down the road and through the graveyard, and if my wheel racer held together, I might make it. It was so unstable I thought I was going to go over again. I tipped up on 2 wheels, going around one of the curves, and luckily came down on 3 wheels. I knew I had to fix this problem, but at the time I just had to get to the lighthouse, where hopefully there'd be a ranger, a tourist, or someone to help me. Chapter 5. Let Me In. I came down the road through the bottom of the graveyard and was almost to the lighthouse, but it was after hours and there were no park rangers anywhere to help me. I looked back at Isabel and she was still coming down the hill straight at me. It was like no matter how fast I went down the hill, she was right there behind my backpack hanging on the wheel racer. I just couldn't pull away from her. I felt like I was in a horror movie. Everything was continuing to get darker and it was only 4:30 in the afternoon. And Isabel wasn't slowing down any. She wanted my head. I wished I were back in Mr. Toomey's classroom at this time, listening to one of his boring lessons on eclipses or something. I had reached the lighthouse and was yelling for help. Isabel was getting closer and closer to me. I had rolled onto this big rectangular platform of some kind at the front door of the lighthouse and kept yelling for help, but there was no one to hear me. Isabel was just about to get within striking distance again, and I saw this giant shadow over me. Isabel stopped her attack and looked up over my head at the same shadow. Whatever it was, it got her attention. Something big was coming down right above me. I looked up and heard a loud cranking sound as something that looked like a platform on ropes came down to the ground and landed between Isabel and me. Everything happened so fast that I didn't have time to question all the weird things I was seeing right in front of my eyes. I just remember thinking, what's happening today? This is all too crazy. When I finally got a good look at the platform separating Isabel from killing me, I saw an old man on it wearing a black jacket and a sea captain's hat, sitting on what looked like a wooden antique wheel racer. I had never seen a chair like that before. It had wagon wheels and was totally made of wood. I didn't know how or why, and I didn't care because whoever this was, he seemed to be protecting me from this mad woman. She was determined to take my head off with those claws of hers. The old man held up his hand in her face like a cop stopping traffic. She didn't seem to want to cross him, though, so she took a step back and stopped her attack. I heard the old man shout at her, "That's enough! Be gone with you, woman!" In a split second, I saw Isabel turn into black and white mist, and then just blow away into the air. Then I could see the graveyard and trees where she had just been standing. She was totally gone, and what a relief that was. I thought that this must have been the lighthouse keeper that Bertram had talked about. Then I saw the old man in the chair start to laugh at Isabel's disappearance, like he had gotten rid of the town bully. Now what, I thought. Is he going to make me disappear? Which basically is what he did do. Chapter 6. The Trap Door. Just as I was calming down from my encounter with Isabel Drood, the old man reached behind my head and pulled down on a lever that was sticking out of the wall. I immediately felt a rumble under my wheel racer from the platform I was sitting on. The next thing I knew was the platform I was sitting on started opening downward on one side. It dropped me below ground level into a black hole under the lighthouse, creating a ramp at the same time. I started rolling down this ramp backwards into the dark. This was not fun. I looked up as I rolled down into this underground room and glanced up to see the old man looking down at me laughing through the opening above. I rolled off the platform and the trapdoor sprung back up into place, sealing me into this underground room. I was totally in the dark in some dusty, spider-infested space under the lighthouse. But I would have taken spiders over Isabel any day. I couldn't see anything. It was so dark. I reached back into my backpack and got a little flashlight that I knew I had in there. I hoped the batteries still worked, and thankfully they did. As I shined the light around the room, I noticed the room I was stuck in looked like the inside of a ship. I was clearly in the cellar of the lighthouse, but there were old parts from sailing ships everywhere. Over in the corner I saw a rusty lantern, the kind you see in old Western movies. It was on a wooden barrel, and I rolled over to it. There was a dusty box of matches next to a lantern I tried to light. I had never lit a lantern like this one before. I went through 5 matches before I figured it out. I had to lift the glass around the wick that burned, and there was a little metal lever to do it, but I got it after a few tries. When I finally got the lantern lit, it illuminated the room I was in and everything in it. It was really cool. I could now see that the room was full of maritime artifacts. It looked like the inside of a pirate ship. I kept looking for a way out and saw a spiral staircase over in the corner, but there was no way I was getting up that. Unless I could find another way out, it looked like I was trapped down here. Then I saw over behind the barrel that the lantern had been sitting on a platform with a post that had levers and a crank on it. It had ropes suspended above it, and it looked just like the one the old man with the captain's hat came down on that rescued me from Isabel. This had to be the elevator invention that Bertram, the cemetery caretaker, had told me about. I wondered if it still worked and how it operated. Chapter 7. The Platform. I rolled over and onto the platform and tried to use the crank to make the platform go up, but the crank wouldn't turn. There was no other way out of this cellar for me, and if I didn't find a way, the park rangers were going to catch me here in the morning, and I was going to be in huge trouble. I didn't know if the park rangers would even find me, because by the look of all the dust, nobody ever came down here. There was a large hole in the ceiling above the platform, but the lantern light wouldn't pierce up through it, so I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it up at the ceiling hole, which was the same size as the platform I was sitting on. With the help of my flashlight beam, I followed the ropes all the way up through the holes in the ceilings of the different room levels above me. All these platform-sized holes led up to the light tower at the top of the lighthouse. Looking up, I could see there was a pulley system attached to the platform I was sitting on. At the other end of the ropes was attached a heavy barrel full of chains that looked like a counterweight to make the platform go up. It was a homemade 1800s elevator. I now could see how the lighthouse keeper got from floor to floor in a wheelchair. I thought this was really cool. I knew I had to make this thing work if I was going to get out of the cellar. I tried to crank it, but the crank was rusty and stuck and wouldn't turn. I next tried to push the two levers on the post next to the crank. One lever moved. It looked like a brake of some sort. Then I pulled hard on the other lever and heard a click, felt a jolt, and the platform I was sitting on took off up through the ceiling. I was headed for the rectangular hole in the ceiling that fit the platform I was on. As I went up through the hole in the cellar ceiling and came up through the floor of the room above, the lantern I was holding lit the room for a few seconds as I passed through it. I could see an old-fashioned living room and kitchen. I remember seeing this room before on the park ranger tour of the lighthouse when I came with my parents last year. I continued on up through the room and again went through a platform-sized hole in this ceiling. I just kept going up. This was starting to be a little fun. I started to get a little uncomfortable as the platform I was on continued to move faster. I then came up through the floor to the next level of the lighthouse. It was the workroom and bedroom level where the lighthouse keeper slept and maintained the lamps. The heavy-barreled counterweight dangling from a rope above me came zooming down past me, loaded with heavy iron chains. This sent my platform screaming to the tower above. It looked like I was going to get smashed into the pulleys suspended above me that were holding up the ropes of my platform. I went up through the workroom level and started picking up more speed. I could see the light tower ceiling was quickly coming at me. I grabbed the brake lever and pushed down as hard as I could. It slowed me down a little, but the lever was starting to smoke from the friction of the rope burning. I just didn't weigh enough. This system was designed for a heavier man and a heavy old wooden wheelchair. I was just too light. All I could do now was to hold onto the crank post and the levers as I zoomed through the tower of the lighthouse toward the roof. This didn't look like it was going to end well for me. I had finally run out of rope at the top of the light tower, and the platform just stopped, flinging me into the air above the platform along with my wheel racer. As I was flying in the air, I could see hundreds of feet below, all the way down to the cellar. I was scared, I mean really scared. I don't like heights anyway, and this was my worst nightmare. I would have a long way to fall and think about how I was going to be smashed down in the cellar. My wheel racer came crashing down onto the platform, but I came down off the side of the platform. As I was falling in midair, I reached out for the edge of the platform and was able to grab it. My legs were dangling below as I was clinging to the edge above a 200-foot drop to the cellar below. Luckily, since I had been training to race, my upper body strength was pretty good, but this was still terrifying. I don't know if a kid that wasn't used to pushing and pulling a chair around every day could have held on that long. Getting around in a wheelchair and building up arm and hand strength was an advantage in this situation. But I couldn't have held on for much longer. Just as I felt myself slipping, I heard someone rolling on what sounded like wooden wheels above me on the platform. I had a feeling who it might be. Just as I couldn't hold on any more, I felt a rope lasso under me, and the pressure on my hands and arms started to ease up, as someone was pulling me up above the platform and onto the top of it. It was that same old lighthouse keeper with the captain's hat again. He was sitting in an old wooden wheelchair that kind of looked like mine. He was holding the other end of the rope, and he saved me from plunging to the cellar below. I dragged myself over to my wheel racer and pushed it back over upright again. Then I pulled myself up onto it and kept one eye on the old man in the wooden chair at the same time. As I got into the chair, I was face to face with the keeper of the light himself. After I dragged myself back up onto my wheel racer, I looked at him and said, "Thanks for your help. I couldn't have held on much longer." He just smiled at me and said nothing. Chapter 8. Introductions. I asked if he was the lighthouse keeper, and he smiled and nodded yes. I didn't ask his name because I couldn't remember it from the gravestone. I thought it was Marvin or Martin or something like that, but I didn't want to get it wrong at this moment of introduction, especially after he had just saved my life, twice. He told me his name was Marion McCready, and I told him my name was Chris. Then I asked him, "What's going on today?" I told him I didn't understand what was happening. He looked at me, smiled and shrugged his shoulders, then pointed up. His meaning was clear. It had something to do with the eclipse. Sitting back in my chair, I finally got a good look at him. He had a kind face with a beard and weathered skin. He looked like what I pictured an old sea captain would look like. But I found it very interesting that his chair, or racer, looked a lot like mine. Then Marion looked down at my chair. I could tell he was very impressed with the design, with all the metal and the rubber tires that he had never seen before. He was in a wooden chair from over 100 years ago, but it was so crowded on the platform I really couldn't get around to get a good look at his chair. I put my hand on one of my wheels and said with pride that I had built this wheel racer from spare parts that came from bicycles. Marion looked impressed. He didn't look like he understood what bicycles were, but he took one look at my wheel racer and reached over to the post with the crank and the levers on it and started cranking us down. I could now see that the crank only worked to crank you down, and the levers on the post let the barrel counterweight fall, making the platform go up. As an inventor, I was just amazed at how it all worked. Marion stopped cranking us down to the workroom level, and he rolled off the platform. I happily followed him. I was glad to get off that old elevator that had nearly killed me. At this point, I could get around and really take a good look at his chair. "Wow, this is cool," I told him. Marion looked proud that I was impressed with his design for a second. Then he suddenly looked confused. He reached down to touch his old wooden racer to see if it was cold, I guess. I knew he didn't know what the term cool meant, so I explained it meant he had a great invention and that I really liked it. Marion then relaxed and had a smile on his face again. He had taken pieces of wheelchairs from his time period and some horse and buggy parts and made a heavy but stable racing wheelchair of his own. It had a front wheel design from an old wheelbarrow that was pushed farther out and would keep his chair from tipping over, which mine was doing at high speed. Looking at his design, I could tell that my front wheel was too close to my back wheels. "That's what I'm doing wrong," I told him. "I need something to push my front wheel out like his." He looked up at me and said, "I have an idea that might work." As he rolled over to a pile of junk in the corner, he was looking for something particular to solve my problem. He clearly had something in mind, but I didn't know what he was looking for. Marion found what he was looking for and came back with a broomstick and a coffee grinder handle in his hands and said, "We can use these things to address your design problem." I looked at him and didn't have a clue as to what he was thinking. I thought, how are these things going to help me from tipping over at high speed in front of everybody coming down Monument Hill? He then took the broom and the saw and started sawing off the broom part, leaving just the broomstick. I understood what he was doing now and started taking off the bolts holding my front wheel on to accommodate his broomstick idea. This might really work. I started getting a little excited about the idea of finally having a design that worked. Marion wanted to put the broomstick between my back wheels and my front wheel. By extending the front wheel out, it gave my wheel racer more stability and I wouldn't tip over so easily at high speed. Then he attached the coffee grinder handle to the top of my front wheel so I could steer at high speeds coming down the hill, and I wouldn't have to grab my back wheels to turn. This old man was brilliant. With my very cool and newly designed wheel racer, we got back on the platform and cranked down to the living room level, which was the main floor. My chair felt more stable now, and I had this coffee grinder handle to steer with. Wait till Rosa sees this, I thought. I would totally be able to take on Monument Hill with my friends now. I followed Marion off the platform. He rolled over to the wall where there was another crank mounted, which cranked the platform the rest of the way down through the floor to the cellar below. I asked him if he'd ever raced his chair down Cemetery Hill. He looked at me and told me he had come down that hill with great speed before. With a grin, he asked, "Would you like to engage in a speed contest with me?" I liked the way he talked. I said, "Yeah, that would be great, but, I looked out the window, still worried that Isabel might be out there. He looked at me with a knowing smile. "You will not see her again." I felt a little better being with him and said, "Okay, let's go for it." After spending all this time with Marion, I finally got the total design of this cool lighthouse. The trap door at the front of the lighthouse taking you to the cellar had a lever on the wall that you pulled. It would take you to the cellar where the platform elevator with the counterweight system would be waiting. The platform elevator would then take you to the floor you wanted to go to. When you wanted to go back outside, you cranked the platform back down to the living room, rolled off the platform, and cranked the platform down to the cellar. You would open the side door of the living room and exit the side ramp to the main road outside the lighthouse. The platform would be waiting for you in the cellar the next time you came down the trap door from outside. This is how someone in a wheelchair in the 1800s kept his job as lighthouse keeper. It was brilliant. Chapter 9. Race to the Top of Cemetery Hill. We then went to the side door from the living room, where there was a ramp leading outside. We rolled down the ramp and out to the road in front of the lighthouse. I remember after leaving the lighthouse that it was starting to get a little brighter outside. The eclipse was ending, and I started to get a sinking feeling that my adventure might almost be over. I didn't want it to end. Nothing like this had ever happened to me before. I pulled out my cardboard with the hole in it and held it out to see how much time was left. The sun was shining through the hole onto my hand, and the moon was moving past the sun. The eclipse was definitely nearing an end. Marion looked up at me seriously and said, "My time is short. We must make haste." I wasn't sure what was going on that day, but the eclipse had something to do with him being here out of his own time period. I didn't want to waste any time, so I followed him to the base of the hill. "Okay, let's go," I shouted, as we pushed off for the top of Cemetery Hill. This race had become a race against time, to see if we could get to the top of the hill and race down before the eclipse was over. As we pushed our way up the hill the back way, I was still a little worried that Isabel might be out there somewhere, but I didn't see her anywhere. We continued to push our way up the back road to the top of the hill, where it was a longer push but not as steep as the main road coming down through the cemetery. The sun was almost at full strength by the time we got to the top of the hill. I leaned over to Marion and thanked him for making my wheel racer more stable by using the broomstick and the coffee grinder handle. He looked at me, smiled, and said, "It has been a pleasure to make your acquaintance, Chris." He then paused and continued, If I don't make it to the bottom of the hill, you will have to finish for the both of us." We pushed off down the hill. At the time, I just thought he meant his chair might not be able to make it all the way to the bottom of the hill. As we were racing down Cemetery Road, I could hear Marion laughing behind me, having a great time. I remembered the bumps that were coming up. I looked back to warn him. "Watch out for the bumps around the next curve, Marion," I yelled. He was having so much fun he didn't even hear my warning. He was like a kid in a candy store, laughing all the way down the hill. I came around the curve, and there were the same old bumps in the road. Grabbing the new coffee grinder handle, I easily turned and passed around them without a problem. Then I looked up to see the sun was full and the eclipse was now over. Everything was bright and normal again. I looked back behind me, and Marion was coming straight at the bumps. He went right over them, jolting his chair off the road into the grass, heading straight for a group of gravestones. He was still laughing and having fun, though. He was going at least 20 miles an hour over rough grass, maybe more. He was just barely missing stones as he zoomed past them, but he didn't seem to care. I did, though. I guess I had sort of gotten attached to him through our day of adventures. Marion was speeding toward a giant gravestone, still laughing. He was starting to look a little faint, as though you could see through him. He was still laughing uncontrollably, having a great time, but something was changing. I watched Marion crash directly into a huge gravestone. Then something very difficult to describe happened, but I'll do my best. My drawing will help, but it's still hard to show what it looked like. When he crashed into the gravestone, Marion turned into a kind of mist as he hit, almost like a bag of flour had been thrown against a stone, exploding as it hit and then just blowing away into the wind. As I watched this amazing thing take place, I wasn't paying attention to where I was going, and I went off the road and rolled across the grass out of control as well. I couldn't believe it. I crashed my racer in the exact same place I did before, right into Marion's gravestone. I hit my head on the stone and blacked out again. I started to wake up, but this time my head hurt and there was blood coming down onto my face. I felt a hand on my shoulder like before and looked to see if it was Bertram again. This time the hand on my shoulder was younger and it was attached to someone in a uniform, wearing a badge and a gun. I heard a police radio in the background and realized the man helping me up was a park ranger. Chapter 10. The Ranger and the Ambulance. The ranger leaned down and asked me if my name was Chris Richards, and if I was okay. After I told him I was, he got on the radio and said, "We have him, but he's been in an accident in the cemetery. Tell his parents he's banged up a bit, but he'll be all right." There were red lights flashing on top of the ambulance, parked next to Marion's gravestone and the park ranger's truck. I remember thinking, I was in real trouble now. The paramedics put me on the stretcher to take me to the ambulance, and I quickly grabbed the ranger's arm and asked if he could bring my wheel racer to my house. He said he would. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was going to be in bad shape this time, because I was really moving fast with this newly designed racer. My head was hurting, and there was blood all over my shirt from the cut on my head. I was worried about the trouble I was going to be in for my mom back at home. My mom gave me an hour lecture about not riding alone in the cemetery as we were on our way home from the hospital. She was concerned about me not wearing my helmet, especially on steep hills with my wheelchair inventions. Not many kids wore helmets back then, but today we do because it could save your life. As my mom was talking, everything seemed to be back to normal, and I began to think about what happened yesterday during the eclipse. This was something supernatural, and no one would believe me. I wouldn't believe me, so I kept quiet about it. Then I started thinking that maybe hitting my head on Marion's stone the first time knocked me out, and I imagined everything. There are no such thing as ghosts. Or are there? Doubts about what happened at the lighthouse started creeping in. There was only one way to know for sure. Where was my wheel racer? I asked my mom if the ranger had brought it back to the house, and she said he had. She said it was banged up a bit, but I didn't care. I just wanted to know if the broomstick and the coffee grinder handle were still attached to it. That would tell me everything I needed to know. We arrived home, and I rolled into the garage to see the wheel racer over in the corner under a tarp. I was really nervous about taking the tarp off, because if the broomstick and the coffee grinder handle weren't there, then one of the coolest experiences of my life had never really happened. Chapter 11. The Unveiling. This was it, the moment of truth. I rolled over to the covered wheel racer and slowly pulled the tarp off to reveal my old wheel racer, which was beat up and had no broomstick and no coffee grinder handle attached to it. I just sat there stunned. What was I thinking? I kind of knew it wasn't real when I was in the hospital, but I was hoping it was still possible. At least now I knew how to make the wheel racer faster and more stable to race down Monument Hill with my friends. That evening I put the wheel racer back together. I found one of my mom's old brooms and cut off the end just like Marion had done in my dream. I didn't have a coffee grinder handle, so I found a file in my dad's toolbox. It would work as a handle, and I stuck it above the front wheel, just like Marion did, to steer with. I put the whole racer back together again, and it all worked perfectly. I was still a little bummed that I'd imagined my lighthouse adventure. It all seemed so real. Chapter 12. Victory on Monument Hill. It was time for the big race. A week later, after I had put my wheel racer back together, I challenged the guys to the big one, Monument Hill, which overlooked our town of Lightning Bow. I had also redesigned the hubs of my wheels to make the racer go even faster. No one took me seriously, and that's just what I was hoping for. We all lined up at the top and took off, letting gravity do the rest. My friends were amazed at how fast the wheel racer went down the hill, leaving them all in the dust behind me. I have to admit I really liked blowing past all of them. Even Chase was impressed at the speed of my invention. To my surprise, my new invention was faster than the fastest bikes in town. Word of my victories began to spread to more people than I expected, as I was about to find out. Word got back to Rosa about me beating everybody down Monument Hill, and if you can believe it, she was talking to me. Rosa agreed to train together at the Briarwood Center for the 1988 Paralympics. This was the best. It was great just to be able to hang out with Rosa. She taught me to shoot, and I taught her about racing. That year in 1984, a woman named Susan Hagel won a gold medal for the USA in Paralympic archery. She was Rosa's hero. Chapter 13. The Invitation. The weirdest thing happened to me one day. When Rosa was teaching me some archery tips on the shooting range at Briarwood, a uniformed officer in black came and delivered a letter to me. She asked me if I was Chris Richards and if I had identification. I told her I did, and I pulled out my wallet to show her my school ID card. I noticed the officer had a badge with a green Beetle Light symbol on it. This was the same symbol I had seen on the security gate back behind the Briarwood Training Center. She handed me the envelope, turned and walked off without saying a word. I looked over at Rosa, and she seemed like she knew something that I didn't know. She was smiling at me as I opened the envelope. She told me that my talent for inventing the wheel racer, which was faster than the fastest bicycle, had gotten back to some very important people. I didn't know what that meant at the time. I reached into the envelope and pulled out a certificate with a green firefly symbol on it and the words Beetle Light. There was also an ID badge and an electronic scanning card with the same green symbol on it. I began to read the certificate. It said, "Congratulations, Chris Richards. You are cordially invited to interview with our organization. Please come to the Beetle Light security section. Please use this letter and identification card to gain entrance to the Beetle Light security area behind the Briarwood Training Center." I didn't get it. I was confused. I looked up at Rosa, and she was pointing to the back of the Briarwood complex in the direction of the Beetle Light security gate, and just said, "Good luck. They're waiting for you." At that moment, she pulled out her own Beetle Light ID from around her neck and grinned. She was a member of whatever Beetle Light was all this time, and I never even knew it. Chapter 14. The Secret Door. I understood and rolled away toward the back of the Briarwood complex. I made my way to the Beetle Light security gate and came to the uniformed security guard standing next to the gate that protected the main door. There was a scanner for my newly acquired electronic card on the side of the gate to allow me access. This was incredibly exciting because I had always wanted to know what was behind this gate. When I arrived, the guard asked for my ID badge. I showed it to him, and he passed me through to the main door. I slowly approached the main door and pulled out the electronic card with a green firefly on it. I swiped it through the scanner next to the door and heard a click. This was really cool. What was on the other side, I wondered. Then a motor started opening the door automatically to reveal the most amazing sight I have ever seen. You know how people say, this is really amazing, and it might be kind of cool, but it's not that great? This was not one of those times. This was the coolest thing I have ever seen, and is the whole reason I am journaling about what Beetle Light is. When the door slowly swung open, I didn't know what I was looking at was even possible. The only thing that came to mind was, they're just like me. Watch for Beetle Light Journal number 2, The Night Raid.